The Gospel according to St. John, the 15th chapter.
Glory to you, God.
Jesus said in his final farewell discourse, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from the Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appoint you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another." The Gospel of the Lord. The best parenting advice I ever received was from my father. My father was a psychologist who was trained during the height of Erik Erikson's developmental psychology and the stages of life. And so he was a firm believer that people go through different developmental stages and it affects their moral and their ability and their psychological balance. And he told me that when I had children, my parenting was essentially done by the time my kids were 13 years old. He told me my ability to help them into becoming moral beings was determined by that age. And as a result, I became an incredibly strict parent. My kids will tell you, they'll tell you if you ask them today, I was like terrible when it came to what they were able to watch on TV. I don't know how they survived my not allowing them to watch Rugrats. I was that bad. I felt Angelica was mean-spirited. And so I didn't let them watch Rugrats. I limited caffeine. I had a lot of pretty strict rules. So much so that we had a special celebration every year on December 31st. It was called Break the Rules Day. And Break the Rules Day was such that all of my rules and my strict expectations were let go, and they could do whatever they wanted, including having ice cream for breakfast, as long as it wasn't mean-spirited or destructive in a way that would not be reparable. So you could, in fact, have duels using sabers as baguettes rather than lightsabers. I mean, that was allowed on Break the Rules Day. But the rest of the year, I was really strict, and to be honest, raising my children mostly as a single parent, and when their father was in the picture with the chaos of alcoholism, the ability to do that, the ability to be very, very strict, helped me form them. You know, they would come to church in suits, and people would say, "Well, how do you get them to wear suits?" And I'd say, "I tell them to." And that's how it worked until they were 13. And at that time, I decided and made the decision that I had done what I could, and now they needed to make their own decisions. So I went from being the strictest parent in the world to being the lax parent, the one that all the other parents of teenagers hated. Because I didn't have a curfew for my kids. We would talk and they just had to tell me when they were coming home. My only expectation was that they were not allowed to break the law. I didn't think that was too much. They may disagree. But I felt that that was an adequate expectation. And so when they were in middle school and when they were in high school, we talked about things, we discussed things, but they pretty much were able to make their decisions. And I would guide them when they came to me for advice. Up to the age of 8th grade, they were required to be in a sport and music. But after that, it was up to them. I'd given them all of the tools and all of the pieces that I needed for them to be able to make good choices. I say this not as someone who is a perfect parent, because I certainly wasn't, not by a long shot. But what I tried to do was to impart in my children the ability to come within themselves to be able to make good choices, good decisions. And I'm talking about this because I think that's what Jesus is getting at in the farewell discourse and what John is talking about in the lesson that Charles read. Because it's an odd thing. It says, "My commandment to you is that you love one another." And, you know, when I play a game with confirmands called Law or Gospel, and they hear something and they're supposed to say, is that law or is that gospel? And I use that, they're always like, oh, that's gospel because it's got the word love in it. But actually, it's law. It's a command to love. And that seems kind of antithetical. It seems almost like an oxymoron. Because we associate love with a feeling, with an emotion. And commanding someone to feel in a certain way or in a specific way, well, you can't tell someone how to feel. But I believe that the reason that that was set up as a commandment was the same reason that I was a strict parent until my kids turned 13, for moral education. For the ability to think and to always respond to things as children of God, by thinking, is that loving? Now, if you've been in worship or watched worship the last 5 weeks during Easter, I've mentioned love a lot, because every single text that we've had talks about love. And ultimately, it comes down to the decision to be loving. And that comes from something that we ingrain into our system as Christians. That essence of who we are called to be people of love. I put parameters on my children when they were little because I wanted them to make the right decisions when they were older. And I think God makes this a command for the same reason. See, all of God's commandments are not burdensome, as it said in 1 John. They're there in order to allow us to understand and to live full, rich lives. As a parent, all of my rules were absolutely realistic because I wanted my children to grow into the fullness of who I wanted them to be. Okay, the making them wear suits to church on Sunday was probably not on that grain. That was just more my issue. But the rest of them were largely based on when my kids had caffeine, they got rangy and they were not their best selves. And so I limited it until they learned how to do that. When they wanted to plug a fork into the outlet, I didn't stop them because I was a mean mother. I stopped them because I wanted them to make it to the next year. You know, all of the choices and the decisions, I've never met a parent who sat around thinking of reasons to limit their children so that their lives would be more restrictive. Because when you're arguing with your kid, about or when you're a child, you're doing it because you know what's best for them. In the best possible scenario. That's not always the case, but I'm taking the best possible scenario. And that's, I think, what God sets up with the commandments, with all of the rules and the expectations, but they boil down to one that is love. the choice, the decision, the verb to be loving. That's not an emotion. There may be people that we don't like. There may be people we don't get along with. That's okay. It doesn't say you must get along and be, buddies with everybody. What it says is we're supposed to love one another, which means to care for, to be concerned about the well-being, to engage in something that lifts people up rather than tears them down. And when we do that, when we embrace that part of our lives as law, it allows us to live into the gospel, to experience the fullness of what God wants and desires for us. And that's God abiding in us and giving us joy. That happens. The joy is there. God has it present for everyone. It's grace. It's available to everyone. You don't have to be perfect to do it. You don't have to have everything together to do it. You simply have to know God is with you to find and experience that joy. The other thing I did as a parent was every night when I put the kids down, we would sing two songs. We would sing Abide With Me and we would sing Taps. Those are two songs that they sang at camp. And so that was a connection with them and me because we went to the same summer camp. But I also did it because I want them to sing that at my grave. I want them to sing Abide With Me because the words of Abide With Me remind us that God is with us. Abide with me, fast falls eventide. When darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comfort flee, help of the helpless, Lord, abide with me. I want my kids to know, and I wanted them to know, that that's God's gift to us. We love because we want to engage in that, but God will abide with us. Nothing we can do can separate us from that. And when we experience that, and when we know that, when everything falls away, when all comforts flee, when we feel helpless and lost, God will abide with me. That is the grace. That is the good news. That is the hope, even when love fails. I look back at failures I had as a parent, and I have many. I know that ultimately it was God's abiding strength and love that sustains and continues to sustain my children. I know in my own life that knowledge of a God who abides with me through up and down, through struggle and pain and times of joy, that is where our joy is found. And that is not dependent upon something that is external, but something that is internal. The reason we as a congregation have been able to sustain over the last 14 months without gathering is because God abided with us. God stayed with us. God does not leave or abandon us. God's hope is present and will not fail us. We love because it makes our lives better. But we find hope because God loved us. These were Jesus' last words to his disciples. Because Jesus knew that through all the struggles, through all of the pain, through all of the brokenness, loving others makes us better. And knowing God's love gives us joy. Amen.